The locks had already been changed by the time Terence Beaumont pulled into the driveway of the Colonial House in River Oaks at 9:30 on a Wednesday evening in March. He knew because the brass key he had carried on his ring for 11 years, the one worn smooth on one edge from years of use, slid into the deadbolt and stopped, would not turn. He stood on the porch of the house he had personally refinished, the one whose original hardwood floors he had sanded by hand over 3 weekends in August heat because the contractor wanted $14,000, and Terence believed a man should know the bones of the place he lives in. He tried the key once more, then he put it back in his pocket, the way a man puts away something he understands he will never use again, but is not yet ready to throw out. The porch light came on, the front door opened from the inside, and there was Monique, framed in the warm light of the foyer he had painted Benjamin Moore cloud white 4 years ago, because she said it made the entryway feel like a breath. She was wearing a silk robe he had never seen. Her hair was freshly done, the kind of salon work that takes 4 hours and costs $600 new earrings. And behind her, visible just past her shoulder, 2 wine glasses on the kitchen island. Not 1. 2. Terence looked at the glasses. He looked at Monique. He said nothing about the glasses. "Your things are in the garage," she said. "I had Janelle box everything up this afternoon." Monique. She held up one hand, the gesture of a woman who has rehearsed this moment and does not intend to be interrupted. "I spoke with my attorney today. The inheritance is finalized. $42 million, Terence." She said the number slowly, tasting it. 42 million. "And I have spent the last 6 months watching you come home from that office, smelling like drywall dust and cheap coffee. And I have decided that I deserve a life that matches what I am worth now." Terence Beaumont was 44 years old. He had the particular build of a man who had worked with his hands before he worked with his mind, wide through the shoulders, deliberate in his movements, carrying an economy of motion that suggested he had learned early that wasted effort was wasted life. He ran a mid-size architecture firm in downtown Houston that designed affordable housing developments, the kind of unglamorous, essential work that earned respect from the people who understood it and invisibility from everyone else. He stood on that porch and felt the specific quality of silence that arrives when someone you have loved for over a decade tells you, in the house you rebuilt together, that you are no longer sufficient. "Who is inside, Monique?" "That is none of your concern anymore." He nodded slowly. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. The way a structural engineer acknowledges a crack in a foundation. Not with surprise. With the calm recognition that the damage has been progressing for some time and has now reached the point where it must be addressed. "I am going to ask you once," he said. His voice was level, unhurried, the voice of a man who has spent years in rooms where losing your composure means losing the contract. "Are you sure this is what you want? Because this does not reverse." She laughed. A short, bright, dismissive sound. "Go get your boxes, Terence." The door closed. The deadbolt turned from the inside, with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. What Monique Beaumont did not know, standing in her newly secured foyer, with her $42 million inheritance and her second glass of wine, and the man she had been seeing for 5 months waiting in the living room, was that the fortune she believed she had just claimed was not wealth. It was obligation. Every dollar structured as secured debt against a private trust her father had fathered built in the final year of his life. And the sole creditor, the only human being on earth with the legal authority to call in every cent, was the man she had just locked out of his own house. Before we go further, if you have ever poured yourself completely into someone who treated your devotion like furniture, something functional and ignorable until it was gone, stay with this story. It was written for you. 8 years earlier, Terence Beaumont had a savings account with $41,000 in it, a 2-bedroom bungalow in 3rd Ward that he had bought from a retired postal worker, and a wife who still reached for his hand in movie theaters. He also had a father-in-law in trouble. Leonard Ossie had built Ossie and Associates from a one-man drafting table in a rented office on Westheimer Road into one of Houston's most respected black-owned commercial design firms. 40 years of work, government contracts, church commissions, 3 community centers, a public library in Fifth Ward that won a regional design award in 2011. The kind of legacy that does not make headlines but holds neighborhoods together. The firm was 60 days from insolvency. A major municipal contract had been delayed 18 months by a zoning dispute that was not Leonard's fault, but was entirely his problem. Cash flow had collapsed. 2 senior architects had left for firms that could still make payroll. The bank was circling with the patient, methodical hunger that banks reserve for businesses they have already decided to consume. Monique had cried at the kitchen table for 3 nights straight. Leonard was 71 years old and had developed the gray, thinned look of a man watching his life's work die in slow motion while pretending to his family that everything was manageable. Terrence did not make a dramatic gesture. Psychologists who study decision-making in crisis would recognize what he did as a classic example of what is sometimes called quiet agency, the capacity to act decisively, without performance, without requiring an audience or applause. He sat at his drafting table on a Saturday morning with a legal pad and a calculator and spent 4 hours with the numbers. Then he sold the bungalow, cashed out his 401k and paid the penalty. Called in professional relationships he had built over 12 years in commercial architecture. He sat across from 3 bank officers in a conference room on San Jacinto Street and restructured the firm's debt with a proposal so thorough, so meticulously documented, that the lead officer later told a colleague it was the most prepared he had ever seen a non-attorney in a financial negotiation. Within 14 months, Ossie and Associates was not only solvent, it had secured 2 new municipal contracts and hired back one of the architects who had left. Leonard shook Terrence's hand on the porch of his home in Sunnyside on a Sunday after church. The old man's grip was still strong, but his eyes were wet in a way that had nothing to do with strength. "You did not have to do that, son." "Yes, sir," Terrence said. "I did." That Sunday evening, Monique had pressed her face against his chest and whispered, "You saved my father's whole life. That was 8 years ago." Leonard Ossie was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 14 months after the firm's recovery. He was a proud man. Houston Clay was softer. He managed the decline with the same discipline he had applied to everything, adjusting his schedule, delegating with care, showing up at the office 3 days a week, in a pressed shirt and the wire-rimmed glasses he had worn since 1987. But the body has its own timeline, and Leonard's was accelerating. 6 months before that Wednesday night on the porch, Leonard checked into Houston Methodist for what he told his daughter was a routine evaluation. It was not routine. He asked to speak with Terrence alone. Monique was in the cafeteria, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. She had been doing that frequently in recent weeks, looking at properties in River Oaks and Memorial, with the particular intensity of someone assembling a future from ingredients that do not yet belong to her. Leonard's room was on the 4th floor. The window faced west toward downtown, and the late afternoon light fell across the bed in long amber bars that made the old man's face look both warm and translucent. "Sit down, son, and let me finish before you say anything." Terrence sat. "I have spent the last year watching my daughter very carefully. What Leonard described next is a pattern that family therapists sometimes call anticipatory entitlement, the psychological shift that occurs when a person begins to treat an expected inheritance not as a future gift, but as a present right. It changes how they see the people around them. It reorders their loyalties. Leonard had watched it happen to Monique with the helpless clarity of a father who loves his child too much to be fooled by her. He had noticed the new attorney she had been spending time with, a commercial real estate broker named Craig Whitmore, whose interest in Monique had a transactional quality that Leonard, a man who had spent 40 years reading the intentions behind handshakes, recognized immediately. He had seen the way Monique had stopped asking about the firm's projects and started asking about the firm's accounts. He had made his decision. "I have restructured everything," Leonard said. His voice was thin but precise, the voice of a man who has drafted too many blueprints to be careless with specifications. The firm, the properties, the accounts, all 42 million in assets. Everything has been transferred into an irrevocable trust with a matching debt obligation built into its structure. He paused, and the heart monitor beeped steadily in the silence. "You are the sole beneficiary, and the only creditor, the only person who can call the debt." Terence was quiet for a long time. The kind of silence that is not absence but processing. The mind of an architect working through a structure, testing the load paths, checking where the weight falls. "She is your daughter, Leonard. She is, and I love her more than I have words for. But I love what we built more than I love her comfort. And I have watched her long enough to know what she will do with it if there are no walls in place." He reached for Terence's hand with the careful deliberation of a man conserving energy for only the most essential gestures. "Do not show your hand. Let her believe what she is going to believe. When she makes the choice I think she will make, and I know my child, Terence, step in and protect the legacy. Not as punishment, as preservation." Terence held the old man's hand. He felt the tremor in it, the thinness of the skin, the particular fragility of a body that has been strong for 7 decades and is now quietly, irreversibly letting go. "Yes, sir," he said. "I hear you." Leonard Ossie was buried on a Tuesday in October. Beautiful service at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. 400 people. The mayor's office sent a representative. 3 of the community centers Leonard had designed sent delegations of residents who stood in the back, in work clothes, because they had come straight from their shifts to honor the man who had built the rooms where their children learned to read. 5 weeks after the funeral, Terence's mother called him. Dorothy Beaumont was 67 years old. A retired school principal from 3rd Ward, who had spent 34 years managing classrooms of children and could read human behavior at distances that would impress a surveillance professional. She possessed the specific gift of certain black mothers, the ability to know exactly what was happening in her child's marriage from 3 zip codes away, through walls and closed doors, and carefully maintained silences. She had been at a restaurant in Montrose with her book club when she saw Monique in a booth near the window, leaning toward a man in an expensive suit, his hand covering hers on the table. The kind of proximity that removes all ambiguity. Dorothy watched for 90 seconds. She paid her portion of the check. She went home. Then she called her son. "Baby," she said, "your wife is keeping company that does not belong to a married woman." Terence was sitting in his truck in the parking garage of a job site in Midtown. Rain on the windshield, cold coffee in the cup holder. He looked at the drafting compass he kept clipped to the sun visor, the one that had belonged to his father, a tool that draws perfect circles no matter how unsteady the hand holding it, as long as the center point is fixed. "I know, Mama," he said. "I have been preparing." That night he called Vivian Okafor. Vivian Okafor ran a forensic accounting and litigation practice from a converted Victorian on Montrose Boulevard. She was 51, precise, unimpressed by drama, and possessed the particular stillness of a person who has spent 2 decades in courtrooms, where the truth is not volunteered but extracted. She wore dark blazers with no jewelry except a single thin gold chain. And she had a habit of writing notes in green ink that her opponents had learned to dread because it meant she had found something they had hoped she would not. Terence told her everything: the trust, the debt structure, Leonard's instructions, his mother's phone call. Vivian listened without interrupting. She made 2 notes in green ink and said, "How long do you want to give this?" "Long enough for the documentation to be unimpeachable." 18 months, Vivian said. 18 months, he agreed. From that night forward, Terence and Vivian conducted a parallel operation with the disciplined patience of people who understand that legal architecture, like the structural kind, fails when it is rushed. A complete forensic audit of OC and Associates going back 40 months. The systematic documentation of financial irregularities. The quiet legal acquisition of key property liens through the trust. Every filing precise. Every signature witnessed. Every thread secured. And through all of it, Terence came home on time. He cooked red beans on Mondays, the way he had since their second year of marriage. He drove his 2016 Tacoma, with a scratch on the passenger door he kept meaning to fix. He sat in the study each evening, with project plans spread across his desk, saying nothing about the new perfume, nothing about the late arrivals, nothing about the way Monique had started sleeping with her phone face down on the nightstand. Psychologists describe this as sustained composure under chronic betrayal, the ability to maintain behavioral normalcy while processing ongoing emotional injury. It is extraordinarily rare. It requires a kind of internal partitioning that most people cannot sustain for weeks, let alone months. Terence sustained it for a year and a half, not because he felt nothing, but because he had promised a dying man. And Terence Beaumont was constitutionally incapable of breaking a promise. Some nights Monique came home past midnight. Terence would be reading in the living room. He would look up from his book and say, "Long day?" She would say, "Mm-hmm," and walk past him to the bedroom. He would sit in the quiet, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, distant traffic on Kirby Drive, and he would pick up his father's compass from the side table and turn it slowly in his fingers, feeling the weight of a tool designed to maintain precision under any circumstance. And he would think about the difference between patience and passivity, about how they look identical from the outside, but are built from entirely different materials. Then came the night. Monique decided that simply ending the marriage was not sufficient. She wanted an audience. She organized what she called a legacy celebration at the Hotel Granduca. Printed invitations on heavy linen cardstock, event planner, floral arrangements, a string quartet. She reserved the main dining room, the one with the arched windows and the hand-painted ceiling, and assembled a guest list of 180 names. Houston's established community, old money families, architects, city officials, senior pastors, and the particular category of people who had known Leonard Ossie with deep personal respect and had watched his daughter grow up at their tables. She charged the entire event $14,000 to the Ossie and Associates corporate account. The invitations carried a handwritten note. A new chapter begins. She wore a gold gown and the diamond bracelet she had purchased the month after the funeral with funds from the firm's operating account. She stood at the entrance with Craig Whitmore at her side, no longer a secret, and greeted guests with the expansive confidence of a woman who believed her transformation was complete. And then, because private cruelty was insufficient, she had her assistant call Terence that morning. The message was simple. "Mrs. Beaumont requests your presence at this evening's event. Divorce documents will be available for signature at 9 o'clock. Not at an attorney's office, not in private, in a dining room full of everyone who mattered to her. She wanted witnesses to his diminishment. Terence spent that Saturday morning at his mother's house in 3rd Ward. Dorothy made peach cobbler, the one with the brown sugar crust, served from the same blue ceramic dish that had been on the second shelf of her refrigerator since Terence was in the 5th grade. He sat at the same kitchen table where he had done his homework 30 years ago and watched his mother move through the kitchen with the practiced ease of a woman who has made this recipe so many times her hands remember it without her mind. "You nervous?" Dorothy asked without turning from the counter. "No, ma'am." She turned and looked at him, the long, calibrated look that takes decades to develop. "You sure?" He was quiet for a moment. "I am grieving, Mama. That is a different thing than being afraid." Dorothy set down her dish towel. She walked over and put both hands on his face, the way she had when he was small, and trying very hard to hold something together. "Your father would have been proud of you," she said. "Leonard would be proud of you." Terence covered one of her hands with his and held it there. "I know," he said. He left her house at 6:30. At 7:50, a black Lincoln Continental pulled up in front of the Hotel Grand Duca. Terence stepped out in a navy suit, no tie, top button open, unhurried, composed in a way that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with preparation. At his side was Vivian Okafor, carrying a leather portfolio that was approximately 3 inches thick with documentation organized by colored tabs. The dining room was luminous, crystal, white linen, the warm amber light of a room designed to make power feel elegant. 180 guests, the murmur of polite conversation and the quiet clink of glassware. Terence moved through the room the way he moved through job sites, measured pace, steady eye contact, revealing nothing. He felt the room register his presence. Conversations paused. The older guests, those who remembered the bankruptcy crisis 8 years ago, who knew what this man had sacrificed to save Leonard's life's work, watched him cross that dining room floor, and something in their expressions shifted. Monique saw him from across the room. Her smile stiffened for one unguarded second before she reassembled it. She crossed toward him, champagne flute in hand, Craig Whitmore a half step behind. "You actually came," she said lightly. "You invited me, Monique." She gestured toward a table near the center of the room where a manila envelope rested between the floral arrangements. "The papers are right there. 5 minutes and you can go." "Before we get to that," Terence said, his voice carrying only as far as their small circle, "I want to ask you one question. You have told everyone in this room that you inherited $42 million. She lifted her chin. "I did." "Do you understand what that 42 million actually is?" The room, which had been murmuring around them, grew noticeably quieter. Rooms have a collective instinct for moments when something structural is about to shift. Monique laughed, the same bright husso sound from the porch. "It is mine," she said. "My father left it to me." Terence held her gaze for one more second. Then he nodded at Vivian. Vivian Okafor did not hurry. She set the portfolio on the edge of the banquet table, opened it without ceremony, and began placing documents in a precise row across the white linen. She spoke without preamble, and her voice carried the particular authority of someone who has presented evidence in rooms where the stakes were considerably higher than this one. The OC estate, totaling approximately $42 million in assets, was restructured 20 months ago into a private irrevocable trust. That trust carries a matching debt obligation of $42 million built into its legal foundation. Every asset in the estate is secured against that debt. She paused. Mr. Terence Beaumont is the sole beneficiary of the trust. He is also the primary and only creditor. He alone holds the authority to call the debt in. The room went still, not the polite stillness of a pause in conversation. The deep, structural stillness of 200 people simultaneously understanding that the ground beneath the evening has shifted. A woman near the front set down her glass with exaggerated care, as though sudden movement might break something. Monique's champagne flute trembled in her hand. She looked at the documents and then at Terence, and for the first time that evening, she was not performing. "That is not," she started. "That cannot be right." "Page 3, Vivian said evenly, "is the trust certification. Filed 20 months ago. Notarized by 3 independent attorneys. Page 7 is the debt assignment." She moved to the second set of documents. "This is a separate matter." She set down a bound forensic audit report. Clean white cover, OC and Associates letterhead. Over the past 18 months, approximately $1.9 million was transferred from OC and Associates operating accounts into 2 private accounts. One registered to Monique Beaumont. One registered to Craig Whitmore. Documented through bank records, wire transfers, and internal accounting logs. This constitutes financial fraud under Texas Penal Code Section 3245. The room did not erupt. This was not a crowd that erupted, but the collective sound of 180 people drawing breath simultaneously, the quiet rush of whispered reactions, glasses set down, chairs shifting, was its own kind of verdict. The older guests, the ones who had known Leonard Ossie since before Monique was born, who had watched Terence quietly save the firm with his own money, looked at Craig Whitmore and then at Monique with expressions that carried a judgment heavier than any courtroom could deliver. Craig had gone pale. The practiced ease he carried like an accessory had vanished entirely, replaced by the rapid, calculating look of a man scanning for exits. He turned toward the service corridor near the back wall. Two private security officers, coordinated by Vivian that afternoon, stepped into the doorway with the calm, unhurried authority of people who had anticipated this exact movement. "Mr. Whitmore," the taller one said, "please remain where you are." Craig stopped. He looked at the officer. He looked at Vivian. He stayed. Monique forced a laugh, thinner now, the sound of a mechanism straining. "You fabricated all of this," she said. Terence's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. "Your father loved you, Monique. But he knew you, and he planned accordingly." Then Terence reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. What he removed was not a legal document. It was a letter. A single sheet of paper, folded twice, soft at the creases from having been carried for 20 months. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakable to anyone in that room who had received correspondence from Leonard Ossie. Precise, upright, architectural lettering, each character spaced with the discipline of a man who believed that how you rendered your words reflected how you constructed your thoughts. Written on the outside in Leonard's hand. For the man who stayed. The room recognized the handwriting before a word was read. A woman in the second row pressed both hands over her mouth. Terence unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. He cleared his throat once, not from emotion but from the acoustics of the large room, and began to read. "Terence, my son, if you are reading this aloud, it means she made the choice I was afraid she would make. I am sorry for that. Sorry for you, and sorry for her, because I know what she is losing even if she does not." No one in the room moved. "I built Ossie and Associates with a drafting pencil, my father's name, and 40 years of waking up before the sun. I nearly lost it once. You saved it. Not because any contract required it. Not because any law obligated you. You saved it because you are the kind of man who protects what he loves, even when what he loves does not notice." Terence's jaw tightened. His voice held. "I could not leave this legacy to be consumed by carelessness. I could not watch what I saw unfolding and call it love for my daughter. Love that makes space for destruction is not love. It is cowardice." He glanced up, not at Monique, at the older men near the back of the room, the ones who had known Leonard for decades. They were nodding slowly. "If my daughter removes you from the home you built together, and I believe she will, because I know her heart, and knowing it is the heaviest thing I carry, let her know this." The Ossie legacy was never built for consumption. It was built to endure, to be held by someone with the integrity to protect it across generations. He folded the letter once. "You are that person. You have always been. I am proud of you, son. Take care of what we built together. Leonard Ossie." The room held its silence for 5 full seconds. Then Monique broke. She had maintained her composure through the entire reading. Chin elevated, champagne held in both hands, every line of her body, insisting she would not allow this room to see her fall. And then the letter was folded, and her father's voice was somehow present in that dining room, present in a way that had nothing to do with sound, and something in her gave completely. She lunged forward, reaching for the letter with both hands, as though possessing the paper could undo what the words had already done to the room. Her heel caught the edge of the carpet runner. She went down. One knee, then both. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor. The diamond bracelet swung forward and struck the table leg. She caught herself on both palms, and she was on her hands and knees in the center of that luminous dining room. The sound that came out of her was not words, it was grief. Unguarded, unglamorous, unperformed. The kind that does not know it has an audience because it is too large to care. Psychologists call it narcissistic collapse, the catastrophic failure of a constructed self-image when reality can no longer be held at bay. But that clinical label does not capture the human reality of it, which is simply this: a woman on a marble floor, realizing all at once that she had thrown away the only thing that was real. No one rushed forward immediately, not from cruelty, but because there are moments of reckoning that must be witnessed to mean anything, and every person in that room understood they were inside one. A hotel staff member helped Monique to her feet. She was past the point of control. Makeup streaked, hair loosened from the careful updo. She looked across the room at Terence, searching his face for anger or satisfaction, or the specific cruelty of a man who has won and wants the other person to feel it. She did not find any of those things. What she found was harder to bear than all of them: sorrow. Plain, genuine, long-carried sorrow. The quiet grief of a man who had loved his wife faithfully for 11 years, watched her choose destruction for 18 months, and had not enjoyed a single moment of being right. "You hid all of this from me," she said. Her voice was stripped of everything practiced. "No," Terence said gently. "I did not hide it. I prepared for it. Those are two different things. And I did not do this for revenge, Monique. Your father asked me to protect what he built. That is what I did." He looked at her one final time, the long, honest look of a farewell already made in private. Then he nodded at Vivian. She was already on her phone. The legal proceedings took 7 weeks. Vivian's documentation was airtight. 22 months of forensic work organized into 19 exhibit binders, each cross-referenced and notarized. The Houston court ordered Monique and Craig jointly liable for the full $1.9 million, plus penalties, interest, and legal costs. Non-compliance would trigger criminal prosecution. Craig retained a defense attorney the morning after the dinner and, by all accounts, stopped sleeping through the night. His brokerage license was suspended pending a state regulatory review. 3 former clients filed complaints within 2 weeks, complaints that had apparently been sitting in drawers waiting for exactly this kind of public catalyst. Monique hired and fired 2 attorneys in 3 weeks. Her options narrowed to 2: pay or face a grand jury. She paid. It required selling things: the luxury SUV purchased the month after the funeral, the designer wardrobe assembled on the firm's corporate account, consigned through a shop on Upper Kirby, the diamond bracelet appraised and sold to an estate jeweler on Westheimer. It covered a fraction of what she owed. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Katy. Clean building, reasonable neighborhood. The kind of place she would have described 18 months ago as beneath her. The divorce was finalized quietly, through attorneys. Terence signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in Vivian's conference room. Same table where they had mapped everything out 20 months earlier. He used a plain black pen, the same kind he used for project approvals. "Thank you," he said. Vivian looked at him over her thin-framed glasses. "You did the work," she said. "I organized it." 3 weeks after the court judgment, Monique's attorney passed along a personal question. "Who is Corinne Jeffries?" Someone who had attended the dinner had posted a photograph online. A candid shot taken outside the Hotel Grand Duca that night. Terence standing near the car, on his phone, and there, visible through the rear window, a woman sitting in the passenger seat reading a book, short natural hair. An expression of calm, unhurried composure that came through even in a background detail. Corinne Jeffries, 41 years old, structural engineer at a firm downtown. She had a warm, direct laugh she did not use carelessly, and the quiet confidence of a woman who has spent her career in rooms where precision and honesty are not optional. She and Terence had first met 7 years earlier at a Habitat for Humanity build in 5th Ward. Terence had been volunteering his firm's design services. Corinne was overseeing the structural work. They had spent a Saturday morning arguing constructively about load-bearing wall placement while sharing a thermos of coffee, and she had walked away thinking, with quiet certainty, that is a very good man. She held that thought carefully for 7 years. Not urgently, not uselessly, the way a careful person holds something worth holding. 10 months ago, Terence had called her on a Thursday evening. She was finishing project reports at her desk. "I do not know if you remember me," he said. "I remember you," she said. They had been together since. Steadily, honestly, without performance. Two people who understood structural integrity, both the architectural and the human kind, sharing dinners and slow Saturday mornings, and the quiet, extraordinary comfort of being fully known by someone and fully chosen. They were engaged. The wedding was planned for June. Terence responded to Monique's question formally through Vivian's office. "Corinne Jeffries is my fiancée. We are to be married in June." No additional context was provided. None was required. Monique read the response in her Katy apartment, sitting on a rented couch, because most of her furniture had been sold. She read it twice. Then she stood at the window for a long time, looking at the parking lot below, and thought about something her father had told her once when she was young and had mocked a quiet boy at school for wearing the same shoes 2 days in a row. "Baby," Leonard had said, "the ones who do not make noise are the ones you cannot afford to overlook." She had overlooked. The morning light over Houston comes in wide and gold in late spring. Generous light, the kind that touches the glass towers along the skyline, one by one until the whole city is warm. Terence was on the back porch of the River Oaks house at 6:15 in the morning, barefoot, in a clean undershirt and sweatpants, holding a cup of coffee from the pour-over setup Corinne had installed on the kitchen counter 3 weeks ago, with the quiet authority of a woman who intended to stay. In his other hand was his father's drafting compass. He turned it over once, the way he always did. Opened it, closed it, felt the precise tension of the hinge, the specific resistance of a tool designed to draw perfect circles regardless of the conditions around it. He looked out at the backyard. The oak tree he had planted their second year in the house. The patio he had laid himself over a long weekend. 4 of the buildings visible past the fence line, across the skyline, had been designed or consulted on by his firm. Problems he had solved in the early hours with steel-toed boots and a yellow legal pad. He thought about his father. He thought about Leonard. He thought about what it costs a man to pour himself quietly into the people and things he loves, consistently, without recognition, and how it is enough anyway. How it has always been enough. "I did it, Dad," he said softly, to the oak tree and the skyline and the morning. The screen door opened behind him. He heard her before he saw her. The soft sound of bare feet on the wooden porch, the slight catch of breath in the cool morning air. Then Corinne Jeffries slipped her arms around him from behind, her chin against his shoulder, her warmth against his back, holding on with the easy certainty of someone who has nowhere else to be and no interest in being anywhere else. They stood like that, watching the city together. This was one of the things Terence had come to treasure about her, the understanding that silence between two people can be its own language, its own form of intimacy. Corinne had spent her career in rooms where structures were tested to failure, and she had long since learned that what holds is more important than what is said. "You know the guest bathroom still has no towel rack," she said. Her voice was warm, carrying a trace of amusement. "I know. And the kitchen faucet has been dripping since last week. I know that too. And your mother has called me 3 times this week about the wedding flowers. She has mentioned gardenias in every conversation. And I need to know if we are aligned on the gardenias, Terence." Terence laughed. A full, real laugh, the kind that rises from below the ribs, the kind that had been scarce for 18 months and was now, quietly but unmistakably, returning. "Tell her she can have all the gardenias she wants." Corinne reached past him and handed him a second cup of coffee. She had brought 2, the way she always did, because she paid attention to the things that mattered and always had. "Are you all right?" she asked. Not with worry, with the honest, direct care of someone who wanted a true answer. He considered it fully and without hurry. "Yes," he said, "I genuinely am." And he was. Not the performance of being all right. Not the composed exterior of a man enduring something. Actual peace. The settled stillness of a person who has carried a heavy thing for a long time set it down carefully, and walked forward without looking back. Dorothy Beaumont arrived at 11, the way she always did on Sundays, carrying a covered dish, peach cobbler with the brown sugar crust, wearing her good church dress, and the expression of a woman who had been correct about everything, and was far too gracious to mention it. She set the dish on the kitchen counter, looked around the house, the one her son now owned outright, the one his wife had locked him out of on a Wednesday night in March. Then she walked to where Terence was standing, took his face in both hands, and held it there. "I am proud of you," she said. "You already told me that, Mama. I will keep telling you until it reaches all the way to the bottom of you," she said. She released him and looked past him at Corinne. "Now, that guest bathroom has no towel rack. That is unacceptable. We are handling that this afternoon." Corinne laughed from across the kitchen. A warm, unguarded laugh that filled the room the way good light fills a well-designed space. Dorothy winked at her. The gardenia negotiations resumed within minutes. Later that afternoon, while Dorothy and Corinne worked through centerpiece arrangements with the cheerful intensity of two women who had found each other genuinely delightful, Terence stood once more on the back porch, compass in hand. City beyond the fence. He let himself think of Monique. Not with bitterness, not with triumph, with the honest, quiet grief of a man who loved someone for a long time and watched that person dismantle herself, choice by choice, until there was nothing left to reach. He did not hate her. He did not wish her further hardship. He simply accepted, with the full weight of a man who had nothing left to prove, what was true. She had held something rare and real and discarded it because she had mistaken his quietness for limitation and his patience for lack of ambition. She had looked at a man building something permanent and seen only a man standing still. He had his work. He had his mother's peach cobbler and her immovable opinions about flowers. He had Corinne's coffee and her laugh and the slow, extraordinary comfort of being fully known by someone and fully chosen anyway. And he had a house with no towel rack in the guest bathroom, and a dripping kitchen faucet, and a drafting compass that drew perfect circles no matter what was happening around it. He closed the compass, slipped it into his pocket, and went inside to join his family.